Here is our presentation on human trafficking by Cassie, Bethany, McKenna, and Rachel. We're going to be talking about the victim's mindset, some signs of human trafficking, some prevention methods, different types of trafficking, some laws and policies, and a victim story. First, I just wanted to go over a victim's mindset and some needs that they may have once they're away from their trafficker. First, many victims may not even realize that they are a victim. They may think that their own actions cause them to be in the situation that they're in. The shame of what they're being forced to do may cause them to blame themselves and not consider the actual reality of being a victim of their trafficker. Another reason they may not consider themselves a victim is the possibility of having a strong trauma bond with their trafficker. So a trauma bond, according to the Trafficking in Persons report, is when a trafficker uses rewards and punishments within the cycles of abuse to foster a powerful emotional connection with the victim. Traffickers may also act as the protector of the victim, and this can cause a lot of confusion to the victims and cause them to feel loyal to their traffickers, and as if they can't go against them or prosecute them later on, they feel loyal to them as if they have to do everything they say because they are protected by them. As for when victims are no longer with their trafficker, there are a lot of times that the victims actually go back to their traffickers. A lot of the housing options and services for victims are temporary and don't offer long-term help. Once those services expire, the victims are left with no education, no job, no other ways to get money and support themselves. So the only thing that they can think to do is to return back to their trafficker, where they may be fed and taken care of. There's a need for very specific services for these victims rather than just homeless shelters. They need services that could last up to 2 years in order to help them break the trauma bond with their trafficker, go through counseling, get an education or a job, and also just find out how to take care of themselves and protect themselves without feeling like they need to go back to their trafficker.
Next, let's discuss the signs of human trafficking. By knowing who is vulnerable and how to recognize human trafficking, we can help prevent it or stop it. A few vulnerable populations are individuals who have recently moved or have an unstable or unsafe living environment. Substance abuse and having mental health issues is another vulnerable population, specifically children of parents with these issues. Also, children who are in the welfare system, have run away, or are homeless are also an at-risk population. So, how would someone recognize a human trafficking victim in the world? First, they might look physically abused or malnourished. Also, the individual probably will not make eye contact with you, especially if you're a person in authority. When you speak to them, it might seem like their responses are scripted or well rehearsed, like someone told them what to say. Or they might not be able to speak to you at all. The AMP model is used to identify human trafficking. The A stands for the action taking place. For example, recruiting, harboring, or providing something. The M stands for means. How is this person enforcing the action? Is it through force, fraud, or coercion? A quick note here is if the victim is a minor, force, fraud, or coercion does not need to take place in order for it to be trafficking. Last is P for purpose. This can mean the purpose is commercial sex or labor or some type of service. Now that we know how to identify human trafficking, what can we do to prevent it? The biggest preventative is education, making people aware of the issue and how large the issue is. So, to do this, you can write a letter to your elected official. This letter should bring awareness to human trafficking with different statistics or facts, kind of like this video. Also, vote people into office who prioritize ending human trafficking. Another option is volunteering with organizations that fight human trafficking or help survivors that have been trafficked. Lastly, knowing the signs of human trafficking and reporting them. For example, texting be free.
When we look at the types of trafficking, there are 3 different kinds that are the most primary types of trafficking. There's sex trafficking, which is when an individual engages in commercial sex act as a result of force, fraud, or coercion. And if that person is underage, then any commercial sex act is considered trafficking, even if there's no force, fraud, or coercion. Sexual exploitation is also a common experience in sex trafficking, and this occurs in various settings, including brothels, strip clubs, massage parlors, and street contact. And individuals can be trafficked domestically or across international borders. Secondly, we have labor trafficking, and this is forced labor that involves all services where a person's under threat or of a penalty, and for which the person is not offered him or herself voluntarily. And types of forced labor can be debt bondage, domestic servitude, forced labor, or unlawful recruitment of use of child soldiers, which leads us into our third category, which is child soldiers. And these children are recruited and used in armed conflict as combatants and in support roles. And when their recruitment or use is a result of force, fraud, or coercion, then it amounts to trafficking. There are many forms of protection for victims of human trafficking. There are a lot of different organizations that have been created to keep these individuals safe after they've left the industry. But specifically looking at the William Wilberforce Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act of 2008, this is a policy that protects individuals who have been trafficked, and they provide psychological services to help children who have experienced trafficking. They give financial support to those survivors as well. And then if there are children that have been trafficked, the government will provide a child advocate to stand in place of the trafficked victim, just to limit confusion or embarrassment for the child so that they have someone there to advocate for them who is just more involved in the law enforcement part of that. And lastly, if a victim or survivor is reported to the National Human Trafficking Hotline or a Human Trafficking Service, then they will be admitted to any of those services, and those become available to them. Secondly, a federal law that's in place to protect trafficked victims is the Justice for Victims of Trafficking Act, or the JVTA of 2015. And this improves the U.S. response for human trafficking, and it contains a number of important amendments that strengthen services for victims. So this is encouraging, knowing that these are in place for victims of human trafficking. And like I said, there are so many more policies and laws set in place to protect and support individuals who've experienced human trafficking.
The next thing we're going to talk about today is a victim story. Talking about victim stories throughout a human trafficking presentation is important to understand the reality of the lives of people who have experienced human trafficking. Today we are going to discuss the victim story specifically about a girl named Louisa Carimoza. Louisa Carimoza grew up in a normal family like many of us until she was the age of 22, and she simply could not find work even with the education that she had received. She was struggling to find work in her hometown called Osh. After months and months of working and needing money and needing to provide for the family and simply not being able to, she was ecstatic when she was approached by a woman that offered her a waitressing job. This job was in Bishkek, which was a little bit disappointing because she knew she would have to leave home, but with the opportunity arising, she decided she would follow it. Once she arrived there, unfortunately, she was held in an apartment and she had her passport taken away. They were simply told that they would get new passports given to them with new pictures to make them more look like themselves. After multiple days left in the apartment, still wondering what their future would hold, they were put on a plane to Dubai. They were then given fake passports with new identities, completely being told to forget their pasts. Once they arrived, they realized that they were going to be a part of the human trafficking and sex industry. They were told that they were to be sex slaves and do whatever the clients wanted. They simply no longer had any say in the matter. This continued on for many months and became the life story of Louisa. She worked in the nightclub business for 18 months. One evening, she was so frustrated with the lack of future and the lack of work she'd been able to provide, she simply let a cop arrest her when they had arrived and busted her for the business that she was working in. After being arrested, she spent an entire year in jail because she was found in possession of a fake ID, even though she was required to be in possession of that for her line of work. After that 1-year sentence she was given, she was released from prison, but this did not mean all things were well for her. She was left on the streets with no job, ashamed and unemployed. She simply didn't know what was next for her. After trying to find work again, she found herself in the same situation she was over 2 years ago when she was just 22, looking for a job. Without anything on the radar, she eventually went back into the sex industry, which is a very common occurrence for many human trafficking victims. After another year in the sex industry for the second time, she was approached by Perdruga, which is an organization that assists women subject to sex trafficking. This is an organization like the ones we've talked about today that help women escape the reality of sex trafficking and start their lives over. Today, she works as an outreach worker at this exact organization to try and reach women that were in the same situation that she was once in. Some of the things she does on a daily basis are provide women with health and safety resources and provide them with information about the legal aid that they can receive. One of the things she walks away stating is that the education is key. Knowing the signs and preventions at all ages and all people is so important. Understanding the reality of this business and how many people get caught up in it is so important. One of the things she mentions is that she wants to raise awareness about this in schools so that girls understand at a young age the importance of education, finding work, and making sure that they trust the people they are accepting jobs from. Louisa Curry-Moza is just one of the many victim stories of this horrible sex trafficking industry and is one of the many women that has benefited like programs about the ones we are talking about today.
Here are our references. Thank you for watching.